All right, today we're tackling one of the most intense chapters in the entire Bible, Leviticus 26. Now, forget what you might think about Leviticus being just a list of rules. This chapter is different. It's a binding contract, a covenant that lays out two radically different futures for an entire nation.
I mean, just think about that for a second. What if your country's whole future, its prosperity or its total collapse, was spelled out in a single agreement? Not some vague prophecy, but a detailed contract with crystal clear terms for blessing and for disaster. That is exactly what we have right here. You know, to really get a grip on how this chapter is structured, scholars point us to something called a suzerain vassal treaty. Think of it this way. A powerful king, the suzerain, makes a deal with his people. He says, if you're loyal to me, I will protect you and provide for you. But if you rebel, there will be severe consequences. And that framework, it is the key that unlocks the dramatic back and forth of blessings and curses we're about to get into.
So at its heart, this covenant presents this incredibly stark choice, a massive fork in the road. There's no middle ground here, no gray area. It's just two clear paths that lead to two completely different destinies. The whole thing hinges on a very powerful if-then logic.
And those two sides of the choice are laid out right there in the text, plain as day. On one side, you have the promise, if you walk in my statutes, but on the other, you have the warning. If, however, you do not obey me, it is a direct all-or-nothing choice, and believe me, the outcomes could not be more different.
So let's start with the good path, the path of obedience. The blessings promised here describe a nation that is just thriving. First, there's incredible provision. We're talking rain at the right time, harvests so huge they overlap with the next planting season. Then there's this deep sense of peace and security. You can sleep soundly, without fear. But the ultimate blessing, the real prize, it's God's own presence. He promises, I will walk among you, and I will be your God, and you will be my people. But if they break that covenant, the consequences are immediate, and they are terrifying. That flourishing life gets turned completely upside down. Peace becomes panic and disease. Victory turns into humiliating defeat. Abundance becomes total despair as they work the land just for their enemies to come and eat the harvest. And the truly chilling part? This is just the beginning.
Yeah. See, the consequences aren't just a one-time thing. They're actually a series of escalating disciplinary actions. And the text makes it clear the goal isn't just punishment for punishment's sake. It's a desperate attempt to get their attention, to call them back. And this discipline just builds and builds in these horrifying stages. And this progression is just terrifying to read. After those initial consequences, if the people still continue in rebellion, God says he'll intensify the discipline. First, a devastating drought that basically turns the sky to iron and the land to bronze. If that doesn't work, then wild animals start attacking their children and livestock. Still no change? Then comes the sword of war and siege warfare in their cities. And finally, the ultimate consequence? Exile. The people are scattered from their home and the land itself is left desolate.
And what's really striking as you read through this is the repeated threat that the discipline will be intensified sevenfold. Now, that number isn't just random. In the ancient world, 7 often represented divine completeness or severity. It's a huge warning sign that this isn't some mild correction. This is a complete and thorough judgment for their stubborn rebellion. And then, in the final, most horrifying stage of this discipline, we get this verse. This isn't just a metaphor for hard times. It describes the absolute rock bottom of societal collapse, the ultimate breakdown of humanity that happens during a desperate siege. It's meant to shock us into understanding just how deep and horrifying the consequences really are. But even there, in that absolute abyss, there's a path back. And this is the crucial turning point of the whole chapter. Total destruction was never the end goal. The entire escalating discipline was, in its own deeply painful way, an invitation to turn around and come back.
And that path to restoration is just as clearly laid out as the path to ruin. It requires a deep and genuine repentance. First, they have to confess their sin, to own their rebellion. Then they have to humble their hearts, break their pride. And finally, they have to accept the consequences of their actions, to make amends for what they've done.
And the promised response to that kind of repentance is, well, it's beautiful. God says he won't reject them forever. He won't break his side of the deal. Instead, he says, I will remember. He'll remember his foundational promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and in doing so, he will restore both the people and the land. So, you might be wondering, were these just empty threats and promises? Not even close. In fact, the tragic history of Israel, recorded centuries later in the books of Kings, reads like a direct fulfillment of this very chapter. Just look at this. The warnings from Leviticus 26 line up with shocking precision to actual historical events. The warning of drought and famine? That happened in the time of Elijah. The threat of sword and siege? It was fulfilled during the Assyrian invasion. Even that horrifying prophecy of cannibalism. Tragically, it's recorded as happening during the siege of Samaria. And finally, that ultimate warning of exile and desolation was realized in the Babylonian exile. It all came to pass. So here's the crucial takeaway from all this. When you look at both the prophecy and how history played out, you see the core truth of the chapter. God's justice in this context isn't just about destruction. It's meant to be corrective. It's severe, absolutely, but it's ultimately aimed at restoration. It's a painful, desperate invitation to return home. And that idea of a corrective, pursuing love is what still resonates so deeply today. As one person, Edwin, put it in a recent discussion on this chapter, I'm amazed at how God is relentless in pursuing my heart. That's love that I should never say no to. And that just reframes everything, doesn't it? It's not a story about a distant, angry God, but about a covenant-keeping God who relentlessly pursues his people. So what do we do with a chapter this intense? Well, we see that choices have real consequences, that justice can be corrective, and that restoration is always on the table. This ancient text is raw, and it's challenging. It doesn't fit neatly into our modern, comfortable ideas, and so it leaves us with a pretty big question to think about. How does this picture of escalating discipline and relentless pursuit challenge our own views of what justice, mercy, and love really look like?